question, why behavioral styles? And I'm not going to typically do a one down kind of a presentation. So I'm looking at responses. Please switch off your mics as well, because as I said, this is all to do with people when we talk about behavioral styles. So put your mics on, don't put things in the chat box, put your mics on and tell me, why do you think behavioral styles are important? Why do you think behavior is important?
Well, they define our thinking process, our mindsets, influence our mindsets.
In one
Interesting,
word,
yes.
in one
Correct,
word, they
yes.
they tell you, they tell the persona that is there, you know, behind the person. The behavior
Okay,
comes
they
out.
tell the persona. Okay, what else?
Behavior can be unconscious. So when we know it, we bring it to our consciousness.
So the most important idea behind behavior is what you and I see. I don't know what's happening behind anybody's mind or in anybody's mind. I base my opinion of whether I can form a relationship. Do I like you? Are you my kind of person? Simply based on the behaviors that I see. Because behaviors is the only thing that is observable. When I look at behaviors, as somebody just said, where do behaviors really stem from? Okay. So typically we look at something in training called the Iceberg Model, and I'm sure this is familiar to all of you, where close to about 90% of the iceberg is what lies below the surface. And this is really what was responsible for sinking the Titanic, because they only saw what lies on top. And similarly, all of us see what lies on the top. So the outer world in which we all coexist only sees 10% of who we are. And what do they see? They see behaviors, words, actions, things that we actually do. Nobody sees what lies below. It is very, very difficult to change what lies below either, because this has been shaped with all of us, the circumstances that we find ourselves in, the environment. Yes, the inner world to some extent or to a large extent does shape our behaviors. So if I feel that every Monday morning, when I attend a reciprocity meeting, I'm going to get something out of it. So my feelings are that I will get additional business. I will get an additional avenues. My behavior, words, and actions reflect that. To take a more basic example, if I'm convinced all maids are thieves, if that's the thought that I've been brought up with, if that's my thought, my bias, my words and actions, the minute something goes missing in the house, will be to pinpoint a finger at the maid. Right? So what is there in the inner world is what reflects in the outer world. I'm not going to try and change the inner world, because that's very, very difficult. And I don't think that's even possible. What we're going to try and see is, irrespective of what is the 90% of the iceberg, how possible is it to change the behaviors, words, and actions? Because research has shown that if I am able to flex my behavior, mirror the other person's behavior, the chances of forming a relationship, getting along with that person are much, much higher. I'm sure all of you have made statements like, he's my kind of person, or she's my kind of person. And that's what it all reflects about. So we're going to see how far we can actually change the outer world of our behaviors, words, and actions. Now, all of us have done the instrument, or at least most of us have done the instruments, but even those who have not done it, I'm going to talk about certain attributes of each of the 4 styles that we're going to discuss. And you're free to figure out your style. Even if there's some degree of doubt, it's okay. We can clarify as we go along. So we look at this particular thing on 2 different dimensions. The first dimension that we look at is assertiveness. Now, the first point I want to establish here is terminologies used in any psychometric, for that matter, do not necessarily align to the English language. So the dictionary meaning of assertiveness might not be or will not be the definition that this particular instrument would actually be using. So when we look at assertiveness here and we talk of somebody who's high on assertiveness, we talk about somebody who's very, very task focused. It's important for them to get the job finished, right? When we talk about somebody who's low on assertiveness, the person is more people oriented. So we'll be more people oriented versus task oriented. So it's not the way I necessarily talk in a sense. The other quadrant that we look at is in terms of responsiveness. So here, when we consider somebody who's low on responsiveness, they adopt a more of an asking approach. When we look at somebody who's high on responsiveness, we look at somebody who's more in the tell mode, right? So a combination of these 4 quadrants gives us 4 specific styles. Now, I also want to establish all 4 styles are good. There is nothing wrong with any of the styles. All the styles are good, wholesome, complete in every respect, right? It's more important when we interact with people or we interact in the outside world that we need to understand, first of all, what is ourselves. And once we've understood what we ourselves are, we look at in terms of how is it that we can align to the outside world or the other people that we interact with. So in these 4 quadrants, the first style that we get is analytical, which is high on task, but low on responsiveness. So they would do more of the asking, right? The second style, which is diametrically opposite, we will look at expressive, or we're calling it expressive. Again, as I said, no alignment to the English language, which is high on tell and high and low on people, right? So their responsiveness is high, but their assertiveness is low. The next style we look at is amiable, which is low on responsiveness and low on people, right? Again, as I said, low or high doesn't matter. The normal inclination is to want everything high. But remember, this is an alignment with an instrument, right? So the third style we look at amiable. The last style, which is high for both assertiveness and responsiveness, is referred to as a driver, right? Now, let's look at some of the characteristics. An analytical person comes across as being extremely knowledgeable. He's very, very detailed. He or she is very, very detailed in how they want to go about doing something. There is an air of competence about them because they know their stuff. When they look at asking, they will ask a lot of probing questions because they need to complete their knowledge. And they will always have a very, very thorough, timed, scheduled follow-up that they would do to get that information in place. Now, you would look at the diametrically opposite person who's an expressive. He's very quick at building relationships. Because remember, he's a more people-oriented person. He's very friendly and sociable. He's adaptable. To some extent, he's an imaginative person, very contrary to the analytical person. If the analytical person doesn't have his pieces of knowledge in place, he cannot move forward. Whereas the expressive person, if he doesn't have those pieces, it's okay. He can imagine something that could fit in there. He's very often a skillful presenter. Even if he doesn't have any data with him, nothing that is there, he can stand up and present and be able to talk about it. Whereas the analytical person, if he doesn't have all his check boxes in place, he cannot present. And he'll turn on and say, but you didn't ask me to present. So we will, as I said, look at diametrically opposite styles because that's where you see the maximum amount of conflict. So let's look at amiable. They build deep relationships. They're a natural listener. They naturally come across as sincere, warm, and accommodating. When I was watching Sankalp's presentation on making compromises, the amiable person is most likely to perhaps make compromises, not as far as the job is concerned. but as far as people are concerned. So if he doesn't like something in somebody, he's more likely to accommodate and say, it's okay, koi baat nahi. So if that's the compromise part of it, I'm not talking here in terms of the task. When I look at the driver, diametrically opposite again, confident, determined, he has to reach his goal. He loves the challenge of, accomplishment. He's clearly a guy who will have a goal in mind. And amiable is quite likely to move ahead without having a goal in mind and said, we'll reach somewhere, right? Extremely focused. And because they're extremely focused, they're pretty good at influencing others. To take it a level further, again, an analytical person, as we said, likes detail, is extremely process driven, and likes to move step by step. An analytical person cannot jump over steps. They look for a lot of research. All their answers will be research based. If he doesn't have the right kind of knowledge, he will actually turn around and say, I don't know, I'll have to look it up. Let me check on Google. He uses research, he'll use a lot of data, he'll use a lot of statistics. There has to be evidence behind his understanding of detail. Whereas on the other hand, the expressive person, because he's competitive, he's ambitious, he is more of a big picture person. Whereas the analytical guy is more filling in the blanks. He's extremely spontaneous. As I said, an expressive person, you ask him to stand up and give a presentation on a subject he knows nothing about. But because he's very versatile and articulate, he will happily stand up and nobody would know that he's not prepared. Extremely high energy, sensitive to some extent, and he really doesn't like detail, which is something which is bread and breakfast for the analytical person. He hates to get into the small print of it, right? On the other hand, we have the amiable. He or she is all about people. People are their life and blood, literally. So in the pandemic, it's the amiables to a large extent who might have suffered. They like to get to know you as a person. It's very important for them to see the person behind the professional. And they're inclined to ask you a lot of personal questions as well. Unlike the analytical, who ask questions which are based on increasing his or her knowledge. The amiable guy will ask questions because they want to get to know you better. They start off by assuming that everybody is trustworthy. So till and until you don't break that trust, they will assume that you are trustworthy. Their focus is more on feelings because remember, they're to do with people and less on the task. They love this teamwork, getting together, brainstorming, let's do it together. This is all typical amiable traits. And they dislike and they avoid conflict like there's no tomorrow. Diametrically opposite, you have the driver, who's the pushy guy in a sense. Yep, let's get it going. Time is of essence. And they are able, unlike the amiable, because people are so important for the amiable, they will kind of take everything into their stride. They don't want to upset anybody. Whereas the driver has the ability to cut the chaff from the grain. And he can clearly articulate what is the exact point. A driver finds it very easy to fire people. An amiable can't fire a person. And they'll say it once, they'll be clear about it. There are no two ways about it. So once the driver has delivered his message, you jolly well stick to the message. So an amiable will never have a clear-cut message. They'll keep going around in circles and they try to deliver a message. Now, as I said, I actually need all of you to experience this. So Kanchan, do you have a list of who's done what? And for all of you who've not done the instrument, in the chat box, can you put down what is your particular style or what you think is your particular style, right? So I actually need you to experience this and not get into the theoretical part of it. So you could be either an analytical, you could be a driver, you could be expressive, or you could be amiable. As I said, all 4 styles are good whole styles. There's nothing wrong with any style. So what we're going to do is, Kanchan is going to be putting you out in your respective breakout rooms. So all the analyticals, we will look at bunching together in a room, the drivers in one room, expressives in one room, and the amiables in one room. Now, what do you have to do in your room? What you have to do in your room is look at what is your style. So if you're an analytical, you will first write down what are the words that describe your style, right? If you're a driver, you will first look at words that describe your style. Similarly, if you're expressive or amiable. So what we're going to do is, in your breakout rooms, nominate one spokesperson. Let the spokesperson write down on a sheet of paper the words that actually you feel describe your style. When you come back after 5 minutes in the main room, we will ask that spokesperson to share what the teams have actually come up with, right? The second thing you have to do is behaviors in the opposing style that makes them seem good or competent, right? So if you're analytical again, your opposing style will be expressive. For expressive, your opposing style will be analytical. For drivers, your opposing style will be amiable. And for the amiables, your opposing style would be drivers. Okay. The third question you have to answer is, what irritates you about the opposing style? Remember, the maximum amount of differences lie with the opposing style. And that's where the maximum amount of conflict is likely to arise. So like you've looked at some things that are good about the opposing style that makes you feel they are competent. What are some of the things that you tend not to like, or what irritates you as far as the opposing styles is concerned, right? Any question? Can't you have everybody's style?
So Rohini, what I've done is I have put out 4 rooms with the name analytical, driver, amiable, and expressive. And
Okay.
the participants can choose their rooms and go in.
Okay, so are they also allowed to move in and out of their rooms?
They can't move out of their rooms. Once they're in it, they have to be there.
Okay.
They can only leave the room.
Okay. So, so we're going to give you 5 minutes in your breakout rooms to answer these 3 questions. After 5 minutes, your breakout room automatically close and you come back, and we will give each of the spokesperson of each of the teams 2 or 2.5 minutes at best to share answers to these 3 questions.
Rohini,
Right.
before we move, can you just put the slide which has all the styles for all members to just run past that? Yeah, maybe so.
Maybe if you want to take a picture of this, you can. You can just click a
Yeah.
picture with your phones.
Right, that makes sense. I think
take
we
it to
got
the
that.
early
Has
slide
everybody
as
got
well.
that? So we can move, right?
Yeah, okay. So Kanchan and I will keep popping into your rooms. And if you have any questions, of course, you can ask. But before we break out, any questions?
Yes.
Yes, Sanjeev.
I had to miss out a short portion of your talk because of an urgent message. But I also have an issue here. My own thinking is, one, at different times is a different personality. You will want to be analytical, but circumstances force you to become expressive, to carry yourself
Fair.
through. Because you may
Fair.
not have all the in-depth knowledge that you would like to have before you speak on something, but you have to speak on it anyway. So you pick up on general knowledge and manage to get by being expressive. Similarly, amiable, being a people's person, could be a short fuse for many. Carrying people means wasting time, getting to convince them somehow. Investing in people, it may be better.
I agree totally.
Invest in capability. You understand, ma'am, where I'm coming from? So you could be having
So-
different portions in the same person could be a 4-way split at different times.
Fair. Fair. And people are actually a four-way split. Now, when you're answering this, or when you're deciding which room you want to go into, I need you to look at what is the first arrow that comes out of your quiver. So all of us would have one predominant way, which is comfortable, which is nice, which is the first strategy that we adopt. I want you to look at that and accordingly get into your rooms. Yes, all of us have the ability. And if you notice, between analytical and driver, because you're sharing one particular quadrant, there will be some similarities. Between analytical and amiable, again, because you're sharing a quadrant, there will be some particular similarities. When we also look at behavioral styles, we don't like to box you in. You could be, for example, analytical as your main style and driver as your backup style. Similarly, you could be expressive as main and you could be driver as backup. But you will never be analytical as main style and expressive as backup. Right? You can choose one, and you also won't be analytical as main style, sometimes driver, sometimes amiable. That's also not going to happen. So it's the first reaction, it's the first quiver that comes, or it's the first arrow that comes out of your quiver. What is the style that you would operate, assuming there were no external pressures on you?